Daniel Carter never imagined that snowy December night in Denver, Colorado, would test his heart in ways he had long tried to forget. The blizzard swept through the silent streets when Ranger, his loyal German shepherd, stopped abruptly near the rusted gates of an old brick estate. There, beneath the flickering porch light, a little girl knelt in the snow, clutching two infants wrapped in a damp blanket. Her lips were blue, her tears frozen on her cheeks, but it was her trembling plea that pierced Daniel's soul. Please, don't leave us too. Who had abandoned her in the storm? Why was she carrying the weight of 3 lives alone? And what choice would Daniel make as the snow kept falling? This story will remind you that even in the coldest nights, God still places miracles in our path. Before we begin, share your country in the comments. I would love to see how far this journey of hope and faith can travel. The city of Denver lay beneath a heavy quilt of snow, its streets muffled in white silence as the December wind cut through like invisible knives. Street lamps cast cones of amber light against the drifting snowflakes, glowing faintly in the icy haze, and every passing car left a trail of slush and grit on the dark asphalt. It was a winter that seemed determined to test every living thing, from the bundled pedestrians clutching paper cups of steaming coffee to the thin sparrows huddled under roof edges. Against this backdrop of cold endurance moved a solitary police cruiser, its headlights slicing through the snowfall. Behind the wheel sat Daniel Carter, a man whose life had always felt bound to winters such as these. Daniel was 36 years old, his tall frame filling the driver's seat with a quiet authority born not just of his badge but of his past. His hair was dark brown, cropped short with flecks of premature gray beginning to show at his temples. His hazel eyes, sharp but weary, seemed perpetually caught between vigilance and memory. He wore a heavy navy police jacket over a flannel shirt, the coat's collar pulled high against the cold. His face bore the rugged lines of someone who had seen too much, too soon, softened only by a stubbled beard that gave him a rough, almost restless appearance. Though he was respected in the Denver Police Department for his tenacity and fairness, those closest to him knew that Daniel carried the scars of a childhood abandoned, scars that the winter always seemed to reopen. In the passenger seat, curled with the patient discipline of a trained guardian, sat Ranger, a 6-year-old German shepherd. Ranger was a muscular dog with a black and tan coat, his amber eyes alert yet gentle when fixed on Daniel. His ears stood tall and his chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, but every sound outside the car made his gaze flick toward the window. Ranger was more than a partner. He was family. He had been assigned to Daniel years ago as a K-9 unit dog, and together they had survived hostage calls, drug busts, and a warehouse fire that nearly ended them both. Daniel often said that Ranger had more sense of loyalty than most humans he had known, and it wasn't exaggeration. The bond between them was forged not only by work, but by life itself. The tires crunched softly over frozen snow as Daniel turned down a narrow road lined with leafless maples. Ahead loomed a familiar building, the old St. Mary's orphanage, where his life had once begun in despair. Its iron gates stood rusted but unbroken, snow clinging to the bars in jagged patterns. The windows were dim, but a faint light glowed from the director's office. Daniel parked, killed the engine, and sat still for a moment, his breath visible in the cold air of the cabin. Ranger let out a low whine, sensing the weight of the moment. Daniel stepped out into the snow, boots crunching, and looked up at the orphanage. The smell of winter mixed with the faint rot of old wood and damp stone walls. He walked the same path he had walked as a child, barefoot sometimes, punished to stand in the hallway for hours. Each brick seemed to whisper a memory, each step echoing with the laughter, tears, and loneliness of dozens of forgotten children. At the end of the hall, behind a wooden door scarred by decades, sat Father James Carter, the director of the orphanage and one of the only constants in Daniel's otherwise shifting childhood. James was now well into his 70s, his back bent and his hair a snowy white. Thick glasses perched on his narrow nose, and his wrinkled hands shook slightly as he arranged papers on the chipped wooden desk. He had always been a stern man, commanding obedience with his piercing gaze. Yet beneath the discipline lay a heart that had tried in his own flawed way to keep children alive in a system too willing to discard them. His strictness, shaped by years of managing dozens of orphans with too few resources, often masked a quiet sorrow for not being able to give them more. When the door creaked open, James looked up. His cloudy eyes widened, recognition dawning slowly but surely. "Excuse me. You are?" His voice was low, aged, carrying both suspicion and fatigue. Daniel smiled faintly, sadness flickering across his face. "My name is Daniel Carter. I used to sit in the far corner of the yard, the boy who always got in trouble for fighting." For a moment silence stretched, then James's face broke into a trembling laugh. "My God, Daniel, the one I thought might never make it past 16. You're alive. You're here." His eyes glistened. "And now you wear a badge." They sat across from each other, the old desk between them, the ceiling fan creaking above in slow circles. For a while, they spoke of the past, of the children who had left, some who had found families, others lost to the streets. Daniel admitted that though he now had a career and a roof over his head, he often felt that something essential was still missing. James nodded, his gaze distant. "Not everyone is strong enough to come back here," he said softly. After a pause, Daniel leaned forward, his voice hesitant yet urgent. "Tell me, is Anthony Brown still alive?" James's expression fell instantly, sorrow darkening his features. He removed his glasses, setting them on the desk, and spoke with a voice heavy as stone. "Anthony passed away 3 months ago. A highway accident outside Colorado Springs. His wife, she died years earlier, giving birth to their twins. 3 children left behind. Isabella, 8 years old, and the babies, Ethan and Emily. Since his death, they've been under the care of his sister-in-law, Betty Collins." Daniel froze. The name Anthony summoned not just a man, but the moment his life had shifted. Anthony had been a young volunteer back then, barely in his 20s, who had walked into the orphanage one sweltering summer afternoon with a bag of pastries and a smile that pierced the gloom. While others treated the orphans with charity or pity, Anthony treated Daniel with respect. He had sat with him on the cracked stone steps and said the words that had changed everything. "You're not a bad kid. You just need a chance. Don't let anyone steal your future." Those words had become Daniel's compass. Without Anthony, there might never have been a police officer. Carter, never a man determined to protect the vulnerable. And now Anthony was gone. James pushed a trembling hand into a drawer and withdrew a slip of paper. He scribbled an address with effort, his pen wobbling slightly. "Here," he said. "This is where the children live now. But I worry. Their Aunt Betty drinks too much. I hear the children are often left alone. They may need someone, Daniel, just as you once did." Daniel took the paper, folding it slowly, his fingers clenching so tightly that the edges dug into his skin. His chest burned with both grief and determination. Ranger, lying by the doorway, let out a low growl, as if echoing the storm swelling inside Daniel. When he stepped back outside, the snow was falling thicker, swirling in sheets beneath the orange lamplight. The sky hung low and gray, the cold air biting at his face. Daniel climbed back into the cruiser, Ranger leaping in beside him. For a long moment he sat in silence, his hazel eyes fixed on the paper in his hand, then on the orphanage gates in the rearview mirror. The memory of Anthony's voice pulsed in his mind. That summer day so long ago, that notebook pressed into his young hands. "Don't let anyone steal your future." Daniel pressed his lips together, slipped the car into gear, and drove off into the white darkness. The address weighed heavy in his pocket, but even heavier was the knowledge of 3 children trembling somewhere in this unforgiving winter. Ranger shifted, his ears pricking, and gave a sharp bark that broke the silence. Daniel glanced at him and nodded. "I know, boy," he whispered. "I know." The cruiser disappeared into the snow, leaving behind the orphanage and the years of silence. Ahead lay a path unknown, but one thing was clear. Anthony's children would not be abandoned, not if Daniel Carter could help it. The road wound deeper into the quiet suburbs of Denver, the streets hushed by a heavy curtain of snow. Street lamps burned dimly through the storm, casting blurred halos that trembled in the swirling wind. Daniel Carter tightened his grip on the wheel, his knuckles pale under his gloves. Beside him, Ranger shifted, his powerful body tensing with anticipation. The German shepherd's breath fogged the passenger window, and his amber eyes were locked forward, ears erect. Every muscle in the dog's frame seemed to say, "Something waits ahead." The address scrawled by Father James weighed heavily in Daniel's pocket, but his heart was heavier still. His thoughts circled Anthony, his laughter, the way he used to pat Daniel's shoulder with reassuring firmness, the words that had carried Daniel out of despair. Each memory clashed with the knowledge that Anthony's children were now shivering somewhere in the same merciless winter that surrounded them. Daniel pressed the gas pedal with a steady foot, the cruiser's tires crunching against the icy street. When the house came into view, it stood like a shadow against the night, a once proud brick home now dulled by neglect. Its roof sagged under the weight of snow, gutters lined with icicles. The iron gate, half buried in drifting snow, gleamed faintly under a lone lantern swinging in the wind. Daniel slowed, headlights sweeping across the yard, and that's when he heard it, the raw sound of children crying. It wasn't a tantrum or ordinary distress. It was the desperate, hoarse sobbing of those left too long in the cold. The sound cut through him sharper than any blade. Daniel parked abruptly and stepped into the snow, the cold biting through his boots. Ranger leapt out beside him, landing with practiced grace, his paws sinking deep but his stance strong. The dog's hackles bristled immediately, a low growl vibrating in his throat. By the gate knelt a thin figure, Isabella Brown, only 8 years old. Her long, dark hair was tangled and clumped with ice, her face red and swollen from the wind. She wore a thin sweater several sizes too small, sleeves frayed, and a pair of jeans stiff with frost. In her frail arms she clutched 2 small bundles, her baby siblings, Ethan and Emily. They were only 9 months old, their tiny faces pale and blotched from the bitter air, their breaths coming in weak shudders. Isabella's arms shook as she tried to shield them with a soaked blanket, her own body trembling violently. She looked up when Daniel approached, her eyes wide and rimmed with desperation, the eyes of a child forced to grow too old, too fast. Behind her, swaying unsteadily near the porch, stood Betty Collins, the children's aunt. Betty was a woman in her early 40s, though her hard living made her appear much older. Her once pretty features were drowned beneath smudged makeup, and her hair hung in matted strands around her face. She was tall but gaunt, wearing a thin robe over a stained dress, feet shoved into slippers unsuited for snow. In her hand she clutched a bottle of cheap liquor, half empty, which she raised now and again to her lips with the hunger of someone long consumed by addiction. Her eyes were bloodshot, her voice hoarse from years of screaming more than speaking. Betty had once worked as a waitress in downtown Denver, but after her husband abandoned her, she collapsed into alcohol and bitterness, pouring her pain onto anyone smaller than herself. She staggered forward now, pointing the bottle at the children as if it were a weapon. "You worthless brats," she slurred, her words slicing through the storm. "You think I owe you my life? You think I'll waste another night freezing because of you? I'd rather raise a dog than drag you along like leeches." Ranger surged ahead before Daniel could speak, planting himself firmly between the children and Betty. His chest expanded as he growled, a deep, thunderous sound that vibrated in the air. His amber eyes glared at Betty with primal warning, and his bared teeth gleamed white under the lantern. Betty stumbled back, her bravado faltering in the face of the animal's unflinching defiance. Daniel dropped to one knee, his police jacket crackling as snow clung to its fabric. He reached carefully for Isabella, his voice softened to a gentleness rarely heard from him. "It's all right. You're safe now. Let me help." Isabella's tears streamed hot against her frozen cheeks. She clutched the babies tighter, as if afraid this man might take them away. Her voice cracked, trembling in the icy air. "Please, officer, don't leave us. Don't leave us like everyone else." Daniel felt her words strike a raw place inside him, a wound from years ago when he too had begged for someone not to walk away. His throat tightened, but he forced strength into his tone. "I won't. I promise." He slipped off his gloves, scooping Ethan gently into his arms. The boy whimpered, his lips tinged blue, and Daniel pressed him against his chest to share his warmth. With his other arm he carefully lifted Emily, her small body barely stirring. Ranger stayed rooted, watching Betty with every flicker of movement, the air around him taut like a drawn bow. Betty's face twisted into a mask of rage. She hurled the bottle into the snow where it shattered, shards scattering like jagged stars. "Take them then," she spat. "Take them and see how long before they bleed you dry. They're nothing but a curse." Isabella sobbed louder, clinging to Daniel's coat, burying her face against him as if his chest were the only refuge left in the world. Daniel stood, his jaw clenched, the twins held close. He gave a firm nod to Ranger, who backed slowly, keeping Betty in sight. Together they moved toward the cruiser, snow crunching under their hurried steps. Isabella stumbled beside him, her legs stiff from cold, but she never loosened her grip on his coat. Daniel opened the back door, placing Ethan and Emily gently inside, wrapping his own scarf around them before helping Isabella climb in. Ranger leapt into the front seat again, shaking snow from his fur, his eyes still glinting like molten amber. As Daniel shut the door, a prickling sensation crawled over the back of his neck. He turned, scanning the storm-darkened street. Beyond the iron gate, past the edge of the lantern light, stood a figure cloaked in heavy winter garments. A black hat pulled low obscured the face, but even from a distance Daniel felt the intensity of the gaze fixed upon him. The figure lingered only a heartbeat before turning away, dissolving into the curtain of falling snow as though the storm itself swallowed him whole. Daniel's breath hung in the air, heavy and clouded, as he stood rooted for a moment. Ranger gave a sharp bark inside the car, snapping him back to the present. He climbed in behind the wheel, his hands trembling slightly as he started the engine. The heater roared to life, warm air filling the cabin, but the chill inside Daniel remained. He glanced at the children huddled together, then at the empty street beyond the windshield. Somewhere out there, in the storm, a shadow had just marked the beginning of something far more dangerous than Betty's cruelty. For now, though, his duty was clear. He had saved Anthony's children from the cold night, and he would not abandon them. Not now, not ever. The snow had not relented by the time Daniel Carter guided his cruiser through the narrow streets leading toward his small house on the outskirts of Denver. The headlights pushed against the thick curtain of white, revealing little more than the swirl of flakes and the glint of ice. Inside the vehicle, the heater struggled to keep pace with the cold, its humming mingling with the soft whimpers of the children huddled in the back seat. Isabella sat rigid, arms locked protectively around her infant siblings. The faint sound of Ethan's coughing and Emily's restless moans pricked Daniel's nerves like needles. He glanced at the rearview mirror, catching the girl's pale face framed by messy strands of hair, eyes swollen and watchful. She did not look at him, only tightened her hold, as if sheer will could keep the world from snatching them away. Beside him, Ranger sat alert, his fur sprinkled with melting snow, ears twitching at every noise. The German shepherd leaned closer to the partition separating the front and back, nose quivering, as if checking each breath from the babies. His calm presence filled the cabin like an anchor in storm-tossed seas. The car rolled into the driveway of a modest single-story home, its roof heavy with snow, its porch light glowing weakly. Daniel lived here alone, close enough to the precinct to respond quickly to calls, yet far enough for silence. Until tonight, the silence had been nearly unbearable, the echo of his past filling every empty room. He parked, cut the engine, and for a long second simply sat, the enormity of what he had taken on pressing against his chest. Ranger whined softly, nudging his elbow. Daniel exhaled, nodded, and stepped out into the icy wind. He carried the twins inside, Isabella close behind, never letting go of the hem of his coat. The warmth of the house hit them in a rush, though it still held the chill of neglect. Daniel had never bothered much with comfort. The wooden floor gleamed from routine cleaning but lacked the scuff marks of play, the walls bare except for a single faded photograph of his police academy class. The living room seemed vast, almost echoing, until the sound of babies crying filled it, transforming the emptiness into something alive. Daniel set the infants on the couch, fumbling with the blanket. Isabella climbed beside them instantly, wrapping her arms around their small bodies with fierce determination. She didn't look at Daniel, only rocked the babies gently, her lips pressed tight, her little body a shield. Daniel scratched at his stubbled jaw, pacing once before retreating into the small kitchen. He found the can of baby formula he had purchased months ago for an outreach drive, but never used. His large hands trembled slightly as he read the instructions on the can, trying to measure the powder into a bottle. He spilled some across the counter, cursed under his breath, then forced himself to slow down. The kettle hissed, steam fogging the window pane, and his reflection stared back at him, a man unprepared, uncertain but unwilling to abandon. When he returned to the living room with a lukewarm bottle, Isabella's sharp eyes followed him with suspicion. Her body curved protectively around her siblings, and she did not move to take the bottle until Ethan whimpered louder. At last, she reached out cautiously, fingers brushing his for the briefest moment before retreating. She tested the bottle against her wrist, then guided it to her brother's lips. The baby latched, and a silence filled the room, broken only by the soft, sucking sound. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Daniel stiffened, instinct drawing his hand to the firearm holstered at his belt. He peeked through the window, then relaxed when he saw a familiar figure. He opened the door to admit Linda Green, a woman in her early 50s. Linda had worked as a nurse for decades before joining the department as a part-time medic, and her presence on late-night calls was something of a legend. She stood tall, her posture straight from years of discipline, her hair streaked with gray and tied back in a bun. Her face was sharp, yet softened by the faint crow's feet that came from a lifetime of compassion. Linda was known for her patience with children and her refusal to tolerate nonsense from adults. Life had made her strong. Her husband's sudden death in a factory accident years ago had left her raising 2 daughters alone, and she carried the resilience of that trial like armor. She stepped inside, her breath still clouding in the cold air, and her sharp eyes immediately took in the scene. The girl clutching the babies, Daniel hovering uncertainly, the spilled formula powder on his sleeve. "Lord help us," she murmured, though not unkindly. "You've really gone and taken on something big, Carter." Daniel managed a tired smile. They didn't have anywhere else. Linda crouched near Isabella, lowering herself until her eyes were level with the child's. Her voice softened, stripped of the brisk tone she often carried at the precinct. "Hello, sweetheart. My name's Linda. I'm here to help. No one's going to take your brother and sister from you." Isabella stared back, silent. Her arms clutched the babies tighter, her knuckles white. Her eyes shifted quickly toward Daniel, searching his face as if to measure whether Linda's words were true. Daniel crouched too, resting one hand gently on Isabella's shoulder. "She's a friend. You can trust her." Ranger padded over and sat near the couch, curling into a protective position. Ethan, still feeding, reached out a tiny hand and tugged at the dog's ear. Ranger's ear twitched, but he did not move away. Instead, he lowered his head and let the baby grasp him. Emily gave a faint giggle, her first in days, and the sound startled all 3 adults into brief stillness before smiles broke across their faces. For the first time, Isabella's lips softened, though she did not quite smile. She looked at Ranger, then back at Daniel, and her body eased slightly. Later, while Linda showed Daniel the proper way to sterilize bottles and change diapers, the children gradually drifted into sleep near the fireplace. The flames painted their faces with warmth. Isabella's small body curled protectively between her siblings and Ranger's great furry form. As the clock neared midnight, the storm outside intensified, snow clinging against the windows, the wind howling like some ancient voice. Daniel sat in the armchair across from Isabella, exhaustion heavy on his shoulders. He rubbed his face with his hands, then looked up to find Isabella's eyes open, glimmering in the firelight. She spoke in a whisper so faint he almost missed it. "Everybody left us before. You'll leave too, won't you?" The words pierced him, sharp and merciless. He rose, crossed the short distance, and knelt beside her. Isabella's hand still clutched her sister's blanket, but Daniel gently took her free hand in his. His voice broke, but his promise was clear. "I will never leave you. Not you, not your brother, not your sister." Her eyes filled with tears, though she didn't cry out. She only held his gaze, the flickering flames reflecting in her pupils, as if testing whether he meant every syllable. At last she closed her eyes and leaned back against Ranger, her breathing steadying. Daniel remained kneeling, her small hand in his, even as the fire crackled and the storm raged outside. In that moment, the house was no longer silent, it was alive, a fragile but undeniable beginning of a family. The snow had stopped by the time Daniel Carter stepped into the courthouse, but the cold air still clung to his uniform like a second skin. The Denver courthouse loomed above him, its stone steps brushed clean of ice by the janitorial staff, but still slick from frost. It was early morning, and the sun struggled to break through low clouds, casting a weak gray light across the crowd of people filing into the building. His breath fogged the air as he carried the twins in their carriers, while Isabella walked close at his side, one small hand clutching his coat. Ranger moved beside them on a short lead, the German shepherd's powerful frame drawing curious glances. His amber eyes scanned every face, posture taut, as if he understood this was no ordinary errand but a battlefield of a different kind. Inside, the warmth of the courthouse could not dispel the tension. People gathered in the corridor, whispering as they recognized the children. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a quilted jacket leaned toward a companion. "That's Anthony Brown's girl." Poor thing, Daniel kept walking, jaw tight. Isabella pressed closer against his side. The case had escalated quickly. Betty Collins had filed a petition claiming Daniel had unlawfully taken the children, calling it abduction under the guise of kindness. And she had hired a lawyer with a reputation that made even seasoned officers uneasy. Michael Harris, in his mid-40s, was tall and lean, with slicked-back black hair that gleamed under the courthouse lights. He wore an immaculate black suit and carried a briefcase polished to a mirror shine. His sharp cheekbones and cold gray eyes gave him the look of a hawk circling prey. Harris had once been a respected corporate attorney, but whispers of bending rules and winning cases through intimidation followed him. He had the charm to smile in front of cameras and the ruthlessness to crush opponents behind closed doors. In the courtroom, Daniel sat at the defendant's table, the children positioned just behind him. Linda Green, who had insisted on coming, settled into the bench with the twins, rocking them gently when they fussed. Isabella sat close to Daniel, her small hands never leaving his coat sleeve. Ranger curled at Daniel's feet, his presence not just tolerated but permitted by the judge, who had acknowledged Ranger's service as a decorated K-9. The sight of the dog alone drew nods of respect from several in the gallery. At the plaintiff's table, Betty Collins looked far different from the ragged, drunken woman of nights past. Her hair had been brushed into a semblance of neatness, her face caked with heavy makeup that failed to hide the redness around her eyes. She wore a dark coat trimmed with faux fur, though its glamour sat awkwardly on her hunched shoulders. She looked brittle, her gaze darting from Daniel to the children with a mixture of resentment and desperation. Harris whispered in her ear, and she nodded stiffly, clutching her handbag as though it were a lifeline. The gavel struck, and Judge Samuel Whitaker entered. Whitaker was in his early 60s, tall with a broad chest and silver hair combed neatly back. His dark robe swayed as he settled into the chair, his face lined with years of experience. Known for his stern demeanor, Whitaker had little patience for theatrics but valued evidence above all. His deep voice filled the room. This court will hear the custody dispute between Betty Collins and Officer Daniel Carter. Counsel may proceed. Harris rose first, his voice smooth, carrying an almost hypnotic cadence. Your Honor, my client is the biological aunt and legal guardian of these children after their parents' tragic deaths. Officer Carter, though perhaps well-meaning, has overstepped his authority. He removed them from their lawful home without court order, an act tantamount to abduction. He has no familial claim, no legal right, and no proof that my client is unfit. Compassion does not grant custody. His words rippled across the gallery, drawing murmurs. Daniel clenched his fists under the table. Before he could rise, David Thompson, his appointed attorney, leaned forward. David was 45, with a broad-shouldered build and neatly cropped gray hair. Once a prosecutor, he now worked independently, known for his unwavering integrity. His voice was calm but cut like steel when he rose to respond. Your Honor, the facts speak differently. Officer Carter encountered the children abandoned in freezing conditions, their aunt intoxicated and hostile. He did not abduct them, he saved them. These children were found huddled in the snow with inadequate clothing, one infant's lips already blue. Leaving them there would have meant severe harm or worse. Whitaker's eyes narrowed. Do you have witnesses? David nodded. The back door opened, and Sandra Lewis stepped in. Sandra was a woman in her late 50s, small and frail, with gray-streaked hair tied back neatly. She clutched her handbag nervously but walked with quiet determination. A former neighbor of the Brown family, she had seen too much to remain silent. On the stand, her voice trembled at first but steadied as she spoke. I often heard the children crying through the night. I once saw Betty throwing their clothes into the yard. The little girl sat outside for hours with her siblings, begging to be let in. I regret not calling the police sooner. But it's true. Her eyes shimmered with guilt as she sat down again. Betty's face contorted. She leapt to her feet, shrieking, Liar! You've always hated me. Harris tugged her back down with a sharp whisper, but the damage was done. The gallery stirred, whispers swelling into outrage. Judge Whitaker banged the gavel. Order! His gaze swept coldly over Betty. Another outburst like that, and you will be removed. Amid the silence that followed, Isabella suddenly rose from her seat. Her small body shook, tears streaming down her cheeks as she ran to Daniel, clinging to him tightly in front of the entire courtroom. Her voice, though broken, carried clearly across the hushed space. I want to stay with you." "You didn't leave us in the snow. You didn't shout at us. Please, let us stay with you and Ranger." The room fell still. Even Harris faltered for a moment, his cold expression wavering as murmurs rippled through the audience. Linda pressed a hand to her mouth, tears bright in her eyes. Ranger lifted his head, pressing his muzzle gently against Isabella's arm, as though sealing her plea with his silent loyalty. Judge Whitaker's stern features softened ever so slightly. He struck the gavel again, his voice steady. After reviewing testimony and the urgent nature of these circumstances, the court grants temporary custody of Isabella, Ethan, and Emily Brown to Officer Daniel Carter, pending further investigation. A collective sigh moved through the courtroom. Isabella buried her face in Daniel's chest, clinging as if she might never let go. Daniel wrapped his arms around her, his heart pounding with relief. But not everyone left satisfied. From the back row, a man sat quietly, his presence almost unnoticed until now. Victor Reed, in his late 40s, wore a long wool coat of deep gray, his dark hair combed back, eyes sharp and calculating. A financier with shadowy dealings across Denver, Victor had made a career of exploiting others' misfortunes. His expression betrayed no emotion as he watched the scene unfold, but his fingers tapped idly against the bench, a silent rhythm that suggested calculation. He had been the one whispering into Betty's ear in recent weeks, stoking her greed with promises of reclaiming her nephew's inheritance. Now, as Daniel left the courtroom with the children, Victor's eyes narrowed, following them with the intensity of a predator marking prey. The storm outside had passed, but within the courthouse shadows lingered, foreshadowing battles yet to come. The snow fell steadily over Denver that morning, a soft curtain of white muffling the sounds of the city. Daniel Carter stood at the courthouse steps, the cold biting into his hands despite the leather gloves he wore. He drew in a deep breath and glanced down at Isabella, who clutched his coat sleeve tightly. The twins were nestled in their carriers, bundled in thick blankets. Ranger stood tall beside them, his tan and black coat sprinkled with snowflakes, ears erect and eyes alert. For once, Daniel felt something more than just tension in his chest. He felt hope. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Spectators leaned forward on the wooden benches, eager to hear the conclusion of the case that had gripped the community. Judge Samuel Whitaker entered with his usual commanding presence, the gavel's echo silencing the crowd. His silver hair gleamed under the overhead lights, his eyes steady and unreadable as he scanned the room. At the plaintiff's table, Betty Collins looked nothing like the proud guardian she had once claimed to be. Her face was pale, streaked with worry, and her once heavily painted lips trembled. The dark fur coat she had worn at the first hearing now seemed too large for her slight, hunched frame. Beside her sat Michael Harris, but the attorney's posture betrayed unease. His sharp features were taut, a faint sheen of sweat glistening on his brow. David Thompson rose from his seat, his steady voice cutting across the tense silence. "Your Honor, the investigation into the Brown estate accounts has concluded. We have obtained documented proof that Miss Collins and her attorney, Mr. Harris, falsified signatures and withdrew funds illegally." He handed a stack of papers to the clerk, who passed them to Judge Whitaker. Whitaker flipped through the pages, his eyes narrowing. "Mr. Harris, the signatures examined here are not those of Anthony Brown. They are forgeries. How do you answer these charges?" Michael Harris rose slowly, his polished facade cracking. His voice faltered. I was only trying to streamline the process. I never intended—" "Enough!" Whitaker cut him off, his voice sharp. "Forgery, fraud, and abuse of legal authority are not accidents. Mr. Harris, you are hereby stripped of your license to practice law in this state, effective immediately. You will face further disciplinary action from the bar." A gasp swept through the courtroom. Betty clutched her handbag as though it could anchor her sinking world. Her voice burst out, shrill and desperate. "No, he told me it was the only way. He promised I'd get their inheritance back. He said—" Judge Whitaker's gavel struck. "Silence. Mrs. Collins, you abandoned these children, left them in the snow while you drank. You spat upon the duty entrusted to you. From this day forward, you are permanently stripped of guardianship rights." The words landed with the weight of finality. Betty collapsed back into her chair, her painted face smeared with tears, her hands trembling as if she had nothing left to grasp. Whitaker's gaze softened slightly as he turned toward Daniel. Officer Carter, given your conduct, the testimony of witnesses, and the children's clear wishes, this court grants you permanent custody of Isabella, Ethan, and Emily Brown. For a moment, silence reigned. Then Isabella's small voice broke through, shaky but clear. She tugged at Daniel's sleeve, her eyes shining with tears. "Daddy." The word struck Daniel's heart harder than any gavel could. His throat tightened, his eyes blurred. He bent down, pulling her into his arms as she buried her face against his chest. The twins, as if sensing the shift, babbled in their carriers, their soft sounds carrying across the room. Ranger wagged his tail, thumping it against the wooden floor, as though giving his own approval. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Some wiped tears, others smiled warmly. For Daniel, the noise faded. All he could hear was the single word echoing in his mind, "Daddy." That evening, Daniel's small home near the precinct transformed. Linda Green had insisted on helping, and she bustled about with a warmth that filled the house. A retired nurse with gray-streaked hair tied back in a bun, Linda had a firm yet gentle manner, the kind that children trusted instinctively. She hung simple decorations, paper streamers, balloons, and a small cake on the kitchen table. "Every child deserves a birthday," she said firmly, lighting the candles even though it wasn't anyone's birthday. "Tonight, we celebrate new beginnings." The children gathered around the cake, the warm glow of the candles reflecting in Isabella's wide eyes. Daniel awkwardly placed his large hands on the table, unsure how to guide her. Isabella looked up at him, her lips trembling into the faintest smile. "Will you help me blow them out?" Daniel nodded, leaning closer. Together they exhaled, the candles flickering out, replaced by the sound of soft applause from Linda. Isabella turned, her smile widening. "Now, I'm not afraid of being left behind anymore." The words cut straight through him. Daniel pulled all three children close. Isabella pressed against his side. Ethan and Emily squirming in his arms, and Ranger pressed against his legs, tail sweeping the floor. His tears came freely, but they were not from grief. They were the hot, stinging tears of a man who had lost so much but had finally found something worth keeping. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Denver in silence. But inside the little house, laughter rang out, warm and bright. For the first time in years, Daniel Carter no longer felt the emptiness of his past. He felt the weight and joy of family. And as he looked down at the three children and the loyal German shepherd curled at their feet, he knew that this winter, harsh though it had been, had given him the light he thought he would never find. At the end of this journey, one lesson shines brighter than the winter snow that once seemed endless. Love has the power to heal wounds that felt too deep, and family can be born not only of blood, but of faith, courage, and compassion. Just as Daniel opened his heart to children who had lost everything, so too can each of us find ways to become the miracle in someone's life. This story is a reminder that even in the coldest storms, God places light before us, guiding us toward hope. The laughter of children, the loyalty of a faithful dog, and the courage of a weary man all became threads in a tapestry woven by the Lord's unseen hand. When we choose love over despair, when we refuse to abandon those who need us, we step into the path God has prepared. In our daily lives, it might be as simple as offering a kind word to someone in pain, listening when no one else will, or standing firm against injustice. These are not small acts. They are miracles, planted like seeds that will grow in God's time. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us where you are watching from and let us know what lesson you carry from this tale. If you believe in the power of God to heal, to restore, and to protect the most vulnerable among us, write Amen in the comments as a prayer of faith. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it so more people can hear stories of hope and light. May the Lord bless you and your family, and may He grant you the strength to be the miracle someone is praying for today.